Ladies and gentlemen, this is my slam dunk version of the 1950s, or as you can see there's Suburbia and the Cold War. What I plan on presenting to you today is an idea of what the 1950s were like. We're kind of covering post-World War II all the way up until the 1960s. So let's begin. 6 C's of the 1950s. You see Cold War, communism, containment, conformity, consumerism, and civil rights. These 6 C's of the 1950s kind of represent what was going on in the 1950s. You can see by the representation of the United States flag and the Soviet flag, we're going to have a Cold War, and I'm going to get into a much greater depth of what that is. We're also going to have a policy that's related to the Cold War, which is communism. We're going to have to deal with the second Red Scare. We had the first Red Scare after World War I, and we're going to have the second Red Scare after World War II. Then we're going to have to try to contain communism. We're going to start to see communism spread, and we're going to have to make concessions of what we're going to do to try and contain communism. You also see conformity, which is the picture there of all the people walking to work, most of them all with hats on and stuff like that. So you're going to actually see after World War II, there's going to be a way that people are going to want to conform. They want to not be outside the norm, and so they're going to really conform to standards, and we'll go through that. And then finally, we're going to talk about civil rights and the 1950s and the civil rights. And starting with the Cold War, I got to talk about the divided Germany. Germany after World War II is actually going to be divided into 4 different zones. You're going to have the British zone, the French zone, the Soviet zone, and the U.S. zone. The U.S., French, and British zone are going to be organized in what becomes known as, sorry, I was playing around with my presentation and I got lost. What becomes known as West Germany. And so these zones right here were the U.S. and French and British zones. These zones right here are going to be the Soviet zone. And so it's going to be literally divided. Berlin is going to be kind of divided a little bit between West Berlin and East Berlin. And the purpose of dividing Germany after World War II is so they cannot gain in strength. So they could be almost neutered, is what they're trying to do. And from 1945 until 1989, you're going to have West Germany, which is the purple of the map, and you're going to have East Germany, which is the gold of the map. That will be reunified in 1989, but always the trick question on AP exams is when was the Berlin Wall built? Well, the Berlin Wall was actually not going to be built until 1962, so it's kind of a good idea, good thing to remember. You also see communism rise to the occasion during this time period. This is just a picture of the major fathers of communism over not only in Germany, because that's where you get Marx from, and Engels, but then Marx and Engels' philosophy from the Communist Manifesto is going to be spread through Vladimir Lenin and Joseph Stalin. These are the really the evil men of that time period, and probably they are more responsible, especially Joseph Stalin is more responsible for killing more people than Adolf Hitler even thought about killing. But communism is going to rise to the occasion after World War II, just like it rose to the occasion after World War I. And so we're going to try to have a policy of containment. One of the first people that are going to warn us about this containment is it's the same guy that warns about the building up of World War II, and that's Winston Churchill, as you see here. Winston Churchill is going to be invited to Independence, Missouri by Harry Truman, and he's going to make a famous Iron Curtain speech. This Iron Curtain speech is delivered as a warning to the United States saying, listen, there is an iron curtain that is descending over Europe from the Adriatic in the south, which is next to Italy, all the way up to the Baltic in the north, which is near the Baltic states of Lithuania, Latvia, and Estonia. And so this iron curtain, all the states that are on the east side of that curtain are falling to the Soviet Union, and so we should be aware of that. You will also see the MAD policy develop during this time period concerning the Cold War. And the MAD policy was mutually assured destruction. The United States will be, of course, the first country that will have nuclear weapons, but in 1949, the Soviet Union will explode their first atomic bomb, and so now you have the two great superpowers that are opposite each other in political attributes are now both have nuclear weapons. The interesting thing in this whole unit is when you talk about the Cold War, you're really going to talk about two superpowers that are really never going to fight each other mano a mano, one-on-one. We're going to use proxies. That's why the Vietnam War and the Korean War and other wars are called proxy wars. We're going to use other nations to fight each other. But in fighting each other, really it's capitalism versus communism. But this MAD policy concerning nuclear weapons is that if we launch and the Soviet Union launches, we're all going to die. This policy works if both nations are worried about dying. My fear always is when you get nations that are not afraid to die and they get a hold of nuclear weapons. That's why, our present talks with the country of Iran, when they see the ability to bring back a new caliphate by sometimes eradicating different people with the use of nuclear weapons, they're not afraid to die. So it almost gets rid of the MAD policy. But during this time period, you had the MAD policy that was instituted. You also see two organizations that are going to be created during this time period. NATO being what I call the good guys. NATO is going to be made up of the countries that are here in blue. And so you can see the United States and Canada are going to be part of NATO. And then you're going to have most of Western Europe are also going to be included in that, including the country of Turkey, are what's called NATO countries. These countries we have all joined together with the promise that if one is attacked, all are attacked and will come to the defense of the others. But what you see in red on this particular map is the picture of the Warsaw Pact. Now, the Warsaw Pact countries are those countries that are going to be created that are going to be owned or really ruled by the Soviet Union. And so the Warsaw Pact is created to counter NATO. Now, luckily for us, the Warsaw Pact is gone, but NATO is still around, and we'll see in the coming years as if the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, which is what NATO stands for, if that is actually going to be fulfilled, because there is some question whether our president or any president is going to continue supporting this NATO, because without the United States, NATO is really nothing. NATO, without the United States, is almost like the League of Nations. It's a very unpowerful organization. Also, you will see the Truman Doctrine will be developed during this time period, and this of course is named after Harry Truman, and the Truman Doctrine has to deal with the country of Greece. There's going to be a battle that's going to take place in Greece, and it's going to be a battle over whether Greece is going to fall to communism or is going to fall to capitalism. Well, we send money, millions of dollars. I think it's $400 million we will actually send to Greece to prevent the fall of communism. And so the Truman Doctrine said we will then intervene, we will then help stop the spread of communism economically, and then that will actually be fulfilled militarily with the Korean War. When the North invades the South, we are actually going to get involved in that war. So the Truman Doctrine really is meant to discuss the stopping of the spread of communism during this time period. And that also is addressed in the domino effect. And what you can see here with the domino effect is China is actually going to fall to communism in 1949. Then the Korean War is actually going to break out in 1950, and it will last until 1953. So you have this spread of communism that is starting to spread over Asia. It will continue into Vietnam, where in 1954 the French will actually leave Vietnam, and the Vietnam War will last from 1954 until 1975, or really 74, when the United States leaves. You also see the country of Laos is going to fall to communism, along with Cambodia. Now, Thailand, Malaysia, Indonesia, Burma, and India never fall to them, but it's a fear. And so we will fight two major wars. One, the Korean War, and the second, the Vietnam War, to try to stop the spread of communism. I always believe those are two justifiable wars, but they set up a different precedent that you should remember as an AP student. The Korean War really ends with nobody winning. It's a tie. We still have North Korea and South Korea, and so nobody wins the Korean War, and so it sets the precedent that you're going to see nobody win this particular war. Ooh, I see a mistake that I have here. I actually put down 1950 twice. This is actually 1953 right here. The Vietnam War, you're going to see us fight for a very long time, and when I present my Vietnam lecture in the 1960s, I'll give you my spin on it. I think it's based upon fact, where I think the Vietnam War was defunded, and not that we lost the Vietnam War, but we left. And there's a legacy of that. And so Korea establishes the legacy of not winning a war, and then Vietnam continues that legacy. And I think that kind of spills over to a little bit of our economic policies, or I should say our war policies, even still today, with a lot of the leaders that come out of the 1960s and 1970s. And so what we currently are having to deal with is whether we are going to intervene on behalf of what we consider the good guys, like we did in the 1950s. Here, as I mentioned before, is another event that will take place during the Cold War, and the second Red Scare is going to be led, one in the House, by a group called HUAC, House on Un-American Activities Committee. And that again is House on Un-American Activities Committee. HUAC, its purpose is to root out communism and to find out who is a communist and who is not a communist. And if you take a look right here, you might recognize this guy. I'm not sure if you recognize him, a future president that was part of HUAC. And yeah, those of you that are yelling at your computer right now, that actually is Richard Nixon. Richard Nixon was the original member of HUAC, and the reason I point him out, I want you to remember this. This is good synthesis. Richard Nixon was an anti-communist. He was part of HUAC. He does not want communism to spread. But in 1973, or actually 72, Richard Nixon will actually take a trip to China, and he is going to open the door to China, which is almost like what's going to happen in the 60s with Lyndon Johnson. He's a president that's going to do something unexpected, like Lincoln. Lincoln is not expected to free the slaves, but he ends up freeing the slaves. So when a president does something that's unexpected, it does cause others to kind of react and realize that maybe that's a pretty bold move and a well-known move. Probably the reason that he doesn't get as much credit is because of what ends up happening with the Watergate scandal. You're also going to see McCarthyism. Let me introduce you to Joseph McCarthy here. Joseph McCarthy is a freshman senator from the state of Wisconsin. He is going to have what are become to be known as a witch trial. He is going to say that there's over 200 Soviet spies that are in the United States State Department. Now, there were not over 200 Soviet spies in the United States State Department, but there were Soviet spies in the United States State Department. So he was right. One of those spies actually was Alger Hiss. Alger Hiss was a high He worked for the FDR administration and was a high official in the U.S. government. And we find out that Alger Hiss is a Soviet spy. He's a agent that's reporting to Stalin all the things that are going on here in the United States, and he will be sentenced to prison for that. But Alger Hiss is a known Soviet spy that worked for both Roosevelt and worked for Truman, that McCarthy actually rooted out. So we did have people that were working in the State Department that were spies, but a lot of people are going to be swept in and they're going to be blacklisted because of that. I have these two individuals that are going to be caught because they're going to be caught selling secrets. These other two, Julius and Ethel Rosenberg, are the reason that the Soviets get the atomic weapon or atomic bomb, and they will be sentenced to death because they will be convicted of treason, because they sold the plans to the atomic weapon, and in doing so, they will allow the Soviets to escalate this Cold War. So Julius and Ethel Rosenberg are probably two of the main culprits that are going to heighten the Cold War during this time period. One of my favorite things that I always used to like to talk about as a kid was the space race, and this is just another aspect of the Cold War and who is going to actually control space. Now, as you see this picture, automatically that should come to mind. This is actually the first satellite that was sent into space by the Soviet Union, which is Sputnik. In October of 1957, Sputnik is going to be launched. I think it traveled almost 25,000 miles per hour, made 14 revolutions a day, or 16 revolutions a day around the Earth, and in doing so, all it really did was beep. I have more technology in my watch, not my cell phone, I'm talking my watch, than Sputnik did back then. But Sputnik is going to push the United States, saying, oh my gosh, the United States is behind in the space race. And so it's going to push the United States to create special science and math programs in the high schools, and then moving into the middle schools and elementary schools. So it really pushes the United States forward, at least into the space program, which ends up leading to, as you can see here, the Mercury program, which is our attempt to put a man into orbit. We, of course, are not the first ones to put a man into orbit. That's going to be the Soviets. They also beat us into orbit first with Yuri Gagarin. But if you take a look at this first rocket right here, this is Freedom 7, and you have Alan Shepard. And this right here is actually where the astronaut was located. And Alan Shepard is going to be the first man that will be launched into space. And then Friendship 7, the third rocket over, is actually going to be the one that's going to carry John Glenn, former senator from the state of Ohio, but one of the Mercury astronauts that's probably most well known because he made 3 revolutions around the Earth before coming back to Earth and splashing down in the ocean. Difference between us and the Soviet Union: we would splash down in the ocean, and the Soviets would splash down on the Earth, which would have to suck. That's, there's not a lot of give in the ocean, but at least there's some. But to crash land on the surface of the Earth, that would leave a mark. And so the Soviets, I'm not saying that they're braver, but they just had a rougher landing than the American astronauts. You also would see the Gemini program. This is where we start, as it's the Gemini stands for 2. We would send 2 astronauts in, and the Gemini program is the precursor to the Apollo program. The Gemini program is how do men react to space travel, and so we would send up multiple people, the 2 people into space, and they would see how they would react to space travel, and that leads us to the Apollo program. The Apollo program is going to be the program that actually gets the United States to the moon. It's actually Apollo 11. As you see here, I believe this is a picture that Buzz Aldrin took of Neil Armstrong. Neil Armstrong, of course, almost like Columbus, being the first man to land and walk on the moon. They landed at the Sea of Tranquility, which happens to be just that portion of the moon where we plan to land. But we will have 17 Apollo missions total. They had other Apollo missions on the board, but the Apollo missions will be scrapped in 1972, which I think was a bad thing. We actually got a lot of technology out of the space program, but we will continue and we will revamp that, which will later on be created into what becomes known as the Space Shuttle. Conformity. Conformity is one of the other C's that you're going to see, and really conformity means not being out of the norm. And I always see conformity as like Warren G. Harding's campaign slogan of the 1920s. Warren G. Harding had a campaign slogan that was called a return to normalcy after World War I. And World War II is just the same way. After World War II, you have all these GIs that were returning, but they had been in uniform for so long that they will exchange their uniform for a suit and tie. And so everybody almost is wearing the same type of clothes and watching the same television programs as you start to see here. You see Father's Knows Best, Ozzie and Harriet, Gunsmoke. You had magazines, as it says, Polly Pigtails for girls. I always like to show this picture of a middle school actually in 1956. And the reason I like to show this picture in 1956 is this person right here happens to be my mother, who along with her twin brother Norm were in this particular picture. But you can see there all the girls are look the same. They all have almost the same length dresses, and they all have the same type of shirt on, and all the boys are in ties for the most part. And so it does lend itself that you were not supposed to show a difference. And so it's definitely a unique time in American lifestyle. A lot of people harken back to the 50s of how well it was to live during this time period. You also see during this time period cookie cutter houses that are going to be made, and probably the first cookie cutter house that's probably most well known, or I should say the first community that's going to be well known, is Levittown. And you're going to have the Levitt brothers in New Jersey. They're actually going to be responsible for creating these cookie cutter houses where all these houses look the same. Well, if you think about it, if you make all these houses the same, what's going to happen to the price of these houses? Of course, they're going to be much cheaper. So the Levitt brothers are actually going to be responsible for making cheap and affordable houses to people and allowing people to actually buy sometimes their first house. And in doing so, it brings a sense of community to the people. But one of the videos, if you happen to watch Happy Days, one of the videos that I recommend in the Century series, there's a gentleman that makes the comment, I can't find my house because they all look the same. I grew up in a community that was like that, where every single house that was on the block looked exactly the same because they created these houses in order to have a cheaply made house. Another form, and I showed you this picture earlier of conformity, is, shirt and tie was just the norm. I have no idea what's going on with this individual right here. It always cracks me up when I take a look at this picture that this individual is kind of being nonconformist by not wearing a shirt, tie, and a hat. But conformity was the big thing, and this is transferred into our TV shows such as Mad Men, if you happen to watch that, which kind of shows what it was like to be a man and what it was like to be a woman during this time period. You have during this time period the baby boom generation that's going on. So to be married was the norm. To not be married was definitely outside the norm. And the outer expression of sexuality is really going to be kind of taboo. And that's why when the magazine Playboy comes out with Hugh Hefner, it's shocking that we're actually going to show nudity to the American public. But the 1950s is a time period that a lot of people But there were examples of nonconformity during this time period, and some of those examples would be like Edward R. Murrow, who was a newscaster of the day, and he would present almost like the other side of the news, the kind of the news that most people were not getting spoken about, some of the underlying problems that we were having, some of the race relation problems that we were having, some of the problems that women were having, the glass ceiling, like they could not break through the glass ceiling. So Edward R. Murrow is going to be one of those people that's going to bring that to the forefront. You're also going to see the growth of the conservative movement during the 1950s with this gentleman here, William F. Buckley. He's probably almost like the godfather of the conservative movement that we have today. If you listen to any talk radio and you have talk radio hosts like Rush Limbaugh or Hugh Hewitt, these are people that William F. Buckley is. He's going to be kind of the creator and father of this conservative movement. You also have C. Wright Mills, who will write about white collar and the power elite, saying how these white collar jobs and the power elite are actually controlling the United States and almost preventing the United States from becoming a great society, which Johnson then will pick up on later on, and that's why he calls his economic policy the Great Society. You also see Arthur Miller. That's going to be he's going to create what's called the death of the salesman, because one of the things that's actually going to die out is the door-to-door salesman during this time period. And he also writes the book The Crucible, which is a book about the Salem witch trials, but in doing so, he's really writing about the McCarthy trials that are going on, and the Red Scare that's going on, and the blacklisting of people that's going on. But he's doing so through the metaphor of the Salem witch trials. You also see Jack Kerouac, who is a writer of the day that is writing. He writes a book called On the Road, which is just like it says there, the search for authenticity, that, what is actual reality. And most of these people are part of the Beat movement, which is B-E-A-T, the Beat movement, which is in the 1950s, is a precursor of what's going to take place in the 1960s. Ayn Rand, or Atlas Shrugged. Ayn Rand is also one of the founders of conservative movement / libertarian movement, and she's going to be probably most prominent in her books about Atlas Shrugged and how the government is growing almost too powerful, and you got to watch out for this growth of the government. So she's going to be opposite of the people that are believing that government is actually the answer to everybody's problem. Jackson Pollock, I always like to cover Jackson Pollock here and show you his artwork. Jackson Pollock is going to be known for the creation of almost like splattered art, as you can see with this particular piece of artwork. It's amazing that these pieces of art are actually sold for millions of dollars. You would think like, hey, I can create that myself, but if you ever got close to one of these paintings, it's just amazing how thick they are in paint. It's extremely thick, but he becomes so well known that a lot of his paintings, like I said, eventually are sold for millions of dollars, and so he becomes a very famous nonconformist painter. Last but not least, I always like to show Mad Magazine as one of the magazines that have been around since the 1950s. This particular magazine shows you on the left-hand side Dick Cheney, and then on the right-hand side Obama. The Dick Cheney reference is where he actually accidentally shot one of his friends out on a hunting expedition, and the 2012 election where at one time he liked Obama, but then I guess he didn't like Obama, didn't love Obama by the time he has the election of 1912. So what I do appreciate about Mad Magazine, it really did try to poke fun at both Democrats and Republicans as you're looking at this time period. Rock and roll music is going to change the scene. It is really going to be the nonconformist. I think it's the easiest for you to remember. If you're going to talk about nonconformity in the 1950s, you can talk about this gentleman right here, which is Little Richard, or this gentleman right here, which is Chuck Berry. These two are the kind of the foundation of rock and roll. But it won't be until you're going to get a young kid named Elvis Presley. Now, why is Elvis so much more well known than Chuck Berry and Little Richard? It's because Elvis, we're not ready for black musicians, African American musicians during this time period. We want to hear the music. We want to love the music. And Elvis, being a Southern boy from Tennessee, he's going to bring it to us. And so it comes in the style of a young teenager and a young 20-something that's going to get everybody excited and be really a nonconformist of the day. If you were, you could probably click on the different hyperlinks that I have here and watch a couple of the videos, video links that I have for Little Richard and Elvis Presley and Chuck Berry. I like the hyperlink that I have for Chuck Berry that references the clip from Back to the Future. This gentleman here is known as Jerry Lee Lewis. He is also a nonconformist during this time period, and I also think I have a hyperlink there for consumerism. Is another C that is going to take place during this time period. Notice what I always like to point out to students. After World War II, we want to buy a lot of products. One of the things that the companies are going to do is right here. After World War II, the companies are going to put this into their products, what's known as planned obsolescence. Planned obsolescence means that after a while, the product's going to stop working. Those of you that have bought, as you watch this, and I say, all right, how many of you actually own the first iPhone? Well, of course you don't. You might have I don't know what the current iPhone is, but iPhone 5 or iPhone 6 or iPhone 12 or whatever iPhone that you have. Well, there's a reason that they keep moving up, because they want you to replace that iPhone, be able to charge you more, and in doing so, that's planned obsolescence. Well, that tradition got started in the 1950s, where they purposely made a new style of an item every year to make sure that they would encourage people to buy the newest. Keeping up with the Joneses is what it was known as. That I always got to have something, the new car, whatever whatever the neighbors have. Also part of consumerism, we start to see fast food start to develop. And Ray Kroc in California is actually going to be the creator of McDonald's. As you can see on that sign there, it says over 1 million sold, but now we have over 1 billion sold. And McDonald's has gone globally, even though they've gotten hammered a little bit by their menu choices, they've actually gotten a little bit healthier in their menu choices. But we as Americans want fast food. We want to be able to go get our burger really quick and not have to wait for it, because prior to this, it was all sit down. Well, now we can drive through and take it home or eat on the way to a meeting or something like that. So McDonald's is going to be part of our consumerism during the 1950s. Also during the 1950s, movies and movie actors really become huge. And this is probably one of the most well-known actors of the day, and that's James Dean, who will die tragically in a car accident, and he becomes an icon. He only made 3 movies, but he really becomes an icon of the day because he's such a young actor and unfulfilled potential. A lot of times people become iconic because of their unfulfilled potential. We were not able to see them or see him grow into what he later became, or later be able to become. Here's just some advertising, some ideas of advertising. One that you still see, which is the alcoholic advertising, but the other on the right that you don't see anymore. I love that. Be happy, go lucky. In a cigarette, taste makes the difference, and Lucky's taste better. Now, I've never smoked in my entire life, and I have no idea if there's actually a taste to cigarettes, but it just never made sense to me to actually take smoke into my lungs. But coming out of World War II, one of the things that we would always send to the veterans of World War II while they were fighting were cigarettes. And that was one of the care packages that we would send. And it continued probably all the way up until the 1980s, when all of a sudden we started learning about the troubles of tobacco and the long-term effects. It's not short-term effects of tobacco, but the long-term effects of tobacco after 40, 50 years of smoking, what happens, and the possible causing of cancer. But in the 50s, we definitely see it advertised. Another thing that is going to be created during the 1950s is going to be the TV dinner. I grew up with the TV dinner. I remember we'd have our TV trays, and my mom would put the TV dinner. We didn't have a microwave because they're not invented yet, but we'd put the TV dinner into the oven. It would be done in about 20 minutes. It was always a mystery what was going to be the dessert, but everything's going to be cooked at 250 to 300 degrees, and let me just tell you, that brownie came out freaking hot, and so it was a tough thing to eat. But you would always have your mashed potatoes here on the left, and you would have your brownie in the middle, and your vegetable there with corn, and then your chicken or Salisbury steak or something. But TV dinners become pretty huge during this time period because, of course, the TV. Which was introduced in the 1940s, is now going to grow in popularity in the 1950s, and all the funny different programs that will be created. I always like to show this particular advertisement. Ladies, don't get offended here, but you can see the guy's almost, the woman is subservient to the man. Show her it's a man's world, and you're buying Van Heusen ties and stuff like that, and the woman's serving you breakfast and stuff like that. And so that's my little, that what happened to Rosie the Riveter is not part of their advertising campaign, but it's my little spin on it. But it is interesting to see what happened to Rosie the Riveter. I always say Rosie's coming back. Rosie's going to come back in the 1960s, and will begin to burn her bra and talk about the protest that she will have, saying that I have been restricted. I have not been able to advance in my career. Now, there were examples of women that actually were able to become successful in the 1950s, but really the 1960s and 1970s, you're going to see women pushed to the forefront, where you're going to have better opportunities both educationally and occupationally. Civil rights, last but not least, of the 1950s. I always like to say the beginning of the civil rights movement started with this gentleman right here, Jackie Robinson. In 1947, Jackie Robinson is going to be the first man to break the color barrier, and in doing so, he is going to integrate Major League Baseball. I always like to talk about Jackie Robinson because he was the best of the Negro Leagues. There was a baseball program that was called the Negro Leagues, and that was for all those people of color, both Latin American and African American, that would play together, and they were not allowed into the major leagues. And so in 1947, Branch Rickey of the Brooklyn Dodgers, you can see that B up on Jackie's hat there, that stands for the Brooklyn Dodgers. They'll eventually move to LA, but Jackie Robinson is going to break the color barrier, and in doing so, he wins the Rookie of the Year. Think about it. The first African-American black baseball player is going to win Rookie of the Year, voted on by the other players to show how good this guy actually was. It's one of the things that I always push, that when they chose him, almost like when they Rosa Parks, they chose somebody with upstanding character. They did not want Jackie to retaliate at all or say anything bad at all for a long time period. They kind of put a muzzle on him to say, look, you're going to take a lot of crap. And in doing so, you're going to help black people in the future. And that's why, if you notice, he's the number 42. If you go to every baseball park, the number 42 has been retired by all Major League Baseball teams, because in honor of Jackie Robinson breaking the color barrier. Another group that you should know, let me introduce you to Linda Brown. Linda Brown is that little girl there sitting on the steps of the Supreme Court, and that's her mother. The Supreme Court case that you have to know, ding, 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 in our new standards in AP U.S. history, is Brown versus the Board of Education of Topeka, Kansas in 1954. The Brown case is going to be the case that is going to reverse Plessy versus Ferguson. If you remember, Plessy versus Ferguson established separate but equal, and that doctrine is going to be around from 1896 until 1954. And in 1954, in a 9-0 decision, the Supreme Court's going to say that Linda Brown is going to be able to go to the all-white school. Now, there's going to be some debate over how she's going to go to the all-white school, but the Supreme Court's going to say to the states. You must integrate the schools. And from 1954 forward, there's going to be a push for this. Those of you that have seen the movie Remember the Titans, that's in the 1970s. That's set in the late 60s, early 1970s in Virginia. And it's a story of a football team that's going to integrate. And so you got to think about this. This is the late 60s, early 70s where they are integrating the schools that began with this decision in 1954, what's known as the Brown decision, or Brown versus the Board of Education of Topeka, Kansas. The one thing that I will say about this case, and I think I have it on this next slide. Oh, I don't have it. I don't have a picture of him. So let me just go back to this picture. The lawyer for Linda Brown, I want you to write his name down. The lawyer for Linda Brown is going to be Thurgood Marshall, and that's Thur good, Thurgood, and then Marshall. Just like John Marshall, but this is going to be Thurgood Marshall, an African-American that will be a member of the NAACP. He will represent Linda Brown. Why is he so important? Well, Lyndon Johnson, I believe in 1967, Lyndon Johnson will end up putting Thurgood Marshall, he will create him first as our Solicitor General, which means he becomes the first African-American attorney that's representing the United States, and then he becomes the first African-American or Black American put on the Supreme Court. And so Thurgood Marshall represented Linda Brown, but eventually he will become the first man of color that will be placed on the Supreme Court by LBJ, Lyndon Baines Johnson. I hope that this next picture, this lady here, you of course know the gentleman hopefully in the background, which is Martin Luther King Jr. The reason I show you both these pictures, that one right there, hopefully you know that is Rosa Parks. December 1955, Rosa Parks is going to refuse to give up her seat on the bus, which is going to lead to the Montgomery bus boycott. That bus boycott is going to be led by that 26-year-old back there named Martin Luther King Jr. Martin Luther King Jr. is going to lead this bus boycott, and in doing so is going to spark the civil rights movement. But Rosa Parks kind of is seen as the linchpin of the civil rights movement in 1955, because for the whole next year, not a single person of color is going to ride the city buses in Montgomery, Alabama. They're going to peacefully protest, and in doing so, it really hurts the city economically. And so they're going to be forced economically to integrate the buses, and in doing so, Martin Luther King's going to fulfill his peaceful protest, and this becomes one of the first major iconic images of the civil rights movement. You will also see during this time period some tragic images. This right here is Emmett Till. Emmett Till was from Chicago, and he's going to venture, I think it's in Mississippi. I think he travels down to Mississippi, and he's going to make a mistake. The mistake that he's going to make is he's going to whistle at a white woman, almost like a little cat call, almost like a little... Hopefully that wasn't too loud. And in doing so, a group of white men are going to surround this young kid, and they're going to beat him to death. And he's going to be returned to his mom, and his mom's going to have purposely an open casket. And as you can see with this graphic image, that's Emmett Till. And his mom purposely had an open casket to show what those boys, those boys in Mississippi did to her boy, and some of the consequences of this civil rights and what people of color were fighting for. In 1957, there's going to be 9 students that become known as the Little Rock Nine. These 9 students are going to want to integrate Little Rock High School. And in doing so, they're going to be brought in by the 101st Airborne. The governor of the state of Arkansas, Oral Faubus, is going to say, no, I'm not going to let these 9 students attend Little Rock High School. And Eisenhower, to his credit, Dwight Eisenhower, who's president at this time, to his credit, is actually going to go, oh yeah? Well, we're going to bring in the 101st Airborne, and we're going to escort these 9 students into Little Rock High School. And in doing so, will create the Little Rock Nine, and will lead to the integration, or the forced integration, of the high school during this time period. And this right here is just a portrait of Dwight Eisenhower. A lot of times Lyndon Johnson gets a lot of credit, rightfully so, for passing civil rights legislation, but Dwight Eisenhower, who was a Republican during the 1950s, was responsible for protecting African Americans and allowing them to be in society. I'm going to stop here, and what I would highly recommend is that you watch this video, click on the hyperlink up there, Happy Days, and watch this 44-minute video on the 1950s, and it'll kind of give you a visual image of all the things that I just got done talking to. And I thank you for listening to my presentation on the 1950s.